Welcome to Christ in Me with Addie podcast. I'm your host, Addie Overla, and I am so glad that you're here. Whether you're new to Jesus or you've been walking with Jesus for a while or you're not sure about this whole faith in Jesus and life thing, I'm so glad that you're here. Because here on this podcast, we have real conversations about really big questions about faith and life from the lens and perspective of the Bible. And if you're not sure what you believe, you don't have to believe to be a part of what we're doing here on Christ in Me with Addie podcast. This is a safe space to join in these conversations, figure out where God might be leading you, and figure out what kind of relationship you have with Him. I can't wait to get into it with you guys, but be sure to follow me over on Instagram at Addie Overla and join the Christ in Me with Addie broadcast channel to stay up to date on all things with the podcast. Now let's get into today's topic. Hey guys, welcome back to Christ in Me with Addie. We are rolling in season 1, 2025. And I have to say, I'm pretty pumped for today's episode. I told our guests that I have been so excited for this all week. I'm fangirling, and I hope you guys also fall in love with who we have on the show today. But before I introduce her, I just want to go over today's topic a little bit. Have you ever been in a position where you just kind of looked at God and asked him, what are you doing? What's happening? How can this be my life right now? Or have you ever been faced with something that was just so unexpected that you never saw coming and you just didn't know how to deal? I know I've definitely been there, and I wanted to bring our friend on the show today to tell a little bit of her story, but how ultimately God revealed his amazing plan through the unexpected. So welcome to the show today, Laila.
Addie, thank you so much for having me on. This is such a treat. It's such a joy to get to talk to you and to share a little bit about my story. Thanks so much. I'm excited.
I'm so excited too, and people just aren't ready for what you're about to share. And
I need everyone to lower their expectations right now. You are hyping me up too much.
I feel like I've already heard parts of your story because, spoiler alert, but Laila has her own podcast that is just so amazing, and we'll share more about that because it's definitely impacted my life in a huge way. But before we get into that, Laila, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about you and maybe who you are and your background?
Yeah, perfect. Well, first of all, before I get started, my 4-month-old is currently on my chest, kind of trying to like rock him a little bit, but he's recently found his voice. So we're doing a lot of singing, doing a lot of talking. So if you hear little voices or a little voice, that's what's going on. But my name is Laila, like Addie said, and I'm the host of the Learning to Mom podcast, where I inform first-time moms on pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and their baby's first year of life without making them feel overwhelmed. And I know we'll get into this, but essentially, my now husband and we got pregnant before we were married. So we got pregnant out of wedlock. Hardest thing I've ever gone through in my entire life. But the Lord is so good, and he's redeemed so much of our story. But essentially, I was the first of my friends to become a mom. Like, I didn't have anyone. None of my friends were few of my friends were like married even at that point. And so I just wanted to create the resource for others that I wish I could have had. So come on over every Monday. It's a good time.
It is a great time. And I'll just tell you right now how much it's helped me. So for those who are listening and maybe haven't been caught up on the news, my husband and I recently found out that we're pregnant. It was a surprise. I definitely hadn't determined in my mind like whether or not I wanted to be a mom yet. And it's like such a blessing. I know this is kind of a part of Layla's story as well. She was kind of there too, and then like found out she was pregnant. So I instantly connected with you and I found your podcast, and there's just so many helpful episodes from like prenatal depression. Was that the term? I think I just listened to that one. And the structure of the podcast is so great. So it kind of, I'll let you actually explain it, Laila, because you can probably explain it better.
So season 1 is all about pregnancy and birth. And then season 2 is baby's first year of life. And that's what we're in right now. And then next season will be baby's second year of life, and so on and so forth, so that it grows with you as a listener and just like holds your hand and kind of gives you the topics. It's all very chronological. Like if you start day 1, when you start with the oldest episode when you found out you're pregnant, and you just like work your way backwards. And then today we'll be sharing my story, which I have like 1 or 2 episodes on, but essentially I'm just the host. So I just ask the questions and I'm learning right there alongside of you in my podcast.
I love how you say I'm just the host because you do so much. Like you're not just a host, you're also a mom and you juggle so much with your content online and like it takes so much time to plan these episodes. Like you're just amazing is what you are.
Thank you.
But
Well,
yeah,
I mean, you're right there too. We are
I
one and the
try.
same.
I don't have a baby out of my body yet though, so I'm hoping I can keep up with it as well as you do. But I am in season 1, and for anyone listening and you're like, "Well, I'm not even like dating anyone yet, so I'm not really thinking about getting pregnant." This podcast today is not just about motherhood and babies and all the things, but even if you want that in your future, I would recommend Layla's podcast because there's so much information there that should just be like common knowledge to women, and it's so much
Mhm.
stuff that I'm learning for the first time as a currently pregnant woman that I wish I would have known before getting pregnant. So 10 out of 10 recommend if you're a mom. I've even asked my husband to listen to a couple episodes just so he can learn and prepare. So it's awesome. But with all that said, let's dive into Layla's story today. The topic is kind of like not part of the plan. What do you do when the unexpected hits? And how do you find God's grace in the middle of change and challenge? Layla, I'd love to ask you before we get into like the meat of your story, a little bit about like your faith background. How did you come to the faith and sort of like start believing in Jesus, and where did that start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised in a really, really beautiful and great Christian non-denom home. Like really had a relationship with the Lord
Mhm.
from day one, which I also like completely recognize and realize that in itself is of a grace. Like I never really went through this like phase of like, oh, I don't believe, or like, I don't know. I was like 7 and reading my Bible. Like
That's
that's pretty
amazing.
rare. But I also
Yeah.
know that that's like from the Lord, right?
Mhm.
So he's always just given me such a grace to desire him, which has
Mhm.
been a beautiful, beautiful thing. And then actually I ended up, I know you and I have chatted about this, and this is not something that we're going to get into in today's conversation because I know there's a lot of hurt from both sides and there's so much misunderstanding, and that is
Mhm.
not what today's episode is about. But I converted to Catholicism when I was a senior in high school after learning what the church actually teaches instead of
Yeah.
just like thinking, or I guess believing what like quote unquote my youth pastor taught me about
Mhm.
Catholicism. That was also a very difficult challenge because I grew up pretty anti-Catholic.
Mhm.
Just like some churches are very like beautiful and welcoming of all different faiths, I would say.
Yeah.
And then my circle wasn't really. And so that was like a huge act of faith in itself as well. Cause I knew I would be like socially ostracized and like I was told by people that I was making the worst decision of my life and all this stuff.
Mhm.
So anyway, then I converted to Catholicism, which is just so beautiful and I love it. Um, and trying to think what else about my faith. Well, I guess then just going into my story, right? So I was always very like goody girl, great, was saving myself for marriage, met this guy, fell in love, fell into sin, right?
Mhm.
And then before we knew it, we were pregnant. And
Wow.
like that also wasn't my persona. Like basically we would have sex and I would sob my eyes out. I would go to confession. We would say we'd never doing it again. And we got pregnant. And
Mhm.
so that was like I was not the partier. I was not I don't know. I was not like having the bikini pictures on Instagram. Like I was still doing my daily devotional and like fell into this sin. Um, and yeah, I was just terrified out of my mind.
Mhm.
But the Lord has just been so good and so gracious. And I've learned so much about his grace and his goodness and his
Yeah.
mercy. Um, and he has held my hand through that. And now we're married and have 2 beautiful kids. So the little one that you're hearing is our second.
Mhm.
Um, and I know that was a whole whirlwind, and I really should have worked on making that much more concise before we recorded. But that is my faith story in a very large nutshell.
I love that. And before we kind of like move forward, because I have so many questions, I just want to throw this out there that I do have an episode to anyone listening on denominational differences, where I actually interviewed one of my best friends. She's non denominational and her husband's Catholic, and she just kind of explains how they make that work in their life, even though
Mm.
they kind of have two different denominations and how they're raising a child in that. And really, my heart is just unity for the church as a whole. And so I love that even the two of us, being different denominations, can come together and just talk about how good God is, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So, anyways, go listen to that if you are struggling with those denominational differences. But I also love your story, Layla, because it shows, I think so often in the church, we say, like, don't do this and don't do this and make sure you are like guarding yourself here. But the question is, if so many of us fall to sin, because every single one of us is struggling with some sort of sin, what happens if you do? How do you move forward if you do? How do you pick things back up? Where does God meet you if you have fallen to your sin? And so I just love how healed you sound as you're sharing it and how you know how the story turned out. But I'm sure Layla in the moment was like, my life is over. So I wanted to kind of ask, how did you tell friends and family and even like church mentors that you were pregnant, and how did that go?
If you're just listening to the audio, you didn't just see the face that I gave Addie, where my face basically just said like, not well. Those conversations did not go well.
Oh goodness.
Um, well, I am really very so fortunate that like my parents are very pro-life,
Mm,
and it was honestly harder for me not to tell them that I was pregnant than to tell them. And that was still like a very difficult conversation, especially when they like, especially when no one saw it coming, even me.
yeah.
Like, so that was very difficult telling them, but like even the next day was so much better. And like, you know, my mom was like, no, we're gonna do this. We're gonna throw you
Mhm.
a baby shower. We're gonna celebrate this life and all that. You said something there about like how healed I sound.
Yeah.
And I want to speak to those that may be going through this now, and just to give some like encouragement or some insight
Mhm.
into that is how I am now. But that took a very long time to get there. Like it took me like even 2 years ago, like our oldest is now 2.5. So probably until she was like 6 months or a year old, I was not able to tell my story without breaking down, like just because it's so tender and raw. But eventually you'll get to a spot or a point in your story where you can look at it and like not break down. So I'm now at that point, but that's not how it used to be.
Yeah.
And then I was just really fortunate. Like my parents are extremely pro-life, and telling them was difficult. That was really, really hard. But I am so fortunate that it was honestly harder for me to keep that secret from them than to tell them. It was
Yeah.
also a very unique dynamic, Addie, because I was living at home.
Wow.
Yeah. So I felt very much like pregnant at 16, even though I
Yeah.
was 24. But it was
Yeah.
like working from home, like just after the pandemic.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So telling them was really difficult, but it also was something like I was very fortunate that yes, it was hard, but other people have it so much worse. And even
Hmm.
the next day, it was just like, we're going to celebrate you. Here's a baby. We're going to plan a baby shower. We're going to celebrate you. So I'm just so fortunate there. And then I was also I just really hit the jackpot. And I know this is not everyone's story.
Hmm.
Like this is kind of the far minority that I had so much support. And that really just might have been just, I mean, it had to be from the Lord, just a
Hmm.
huge blessing. Him knowing that I was just beating myself up
Hmm.
for this mistake and for this consequence. Cause I know we'll like be talking about it, but I never wanted to be a mom. Like, so not only was this humiliating to me or for
Yeah.
me, because now I'm pregnant out of wedlock and I'm really involved in my church and I had to step down from youth ministry and like all this stuff. Um, but then it was also on top of that was like, no, this is something that I don't want. Like, even if I was married, I wouldn't want this. So it was very difficult. Um, And I think because of that, the Lord was like, oh, I can't give her anything else. Like, I need to make this as easy as possible because she is beating herself up.
Yeah.
Um, and so I had really great friends that just supported me, and I was just really, really fortunate. But I also know that that's the far minority, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it speaks so highly of your parents and who they are as people that even though you came to them and were saying like this, I think it's so admirable too that you were just like upfront with them. And I think it's amazing that as parents they just embraced you and they're like, "Okay, this is a life and we're going to celebrate it." And that's amazing. But was there anybody in your circle or in your church that maybe didn't respond well? And how do you wish like Christians would have better supported you
Mm,
through a time where you said like you were already beating yourself up and you knew that it was a sin and you messed up.
yeah. No, that's a really good question. I do have one friend that didn't take it very well, and honestly, her and I like are still not very close to this day.
Mm,
Bec I mean, just to one of those was like, here am being very vulnerable, telling you this like secret information that no one else like knows. And
yeah.
I just did not feel like welcomed. I felt pretty judged in that conversation. And I think just like to this day, it's not that I haven't forgiven her, but it's like, huh, I don't know if you can if I don't think I can be, like, vulnerable and transparent and, like, feel like I'm walking alongside of you in this journey to sainthood when,
Yeah.
like, if I fall, you condemn me.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, there's a point like, everyone knew this was not the plan. This wasn't,
Mhm.
like, a promiscuous, if you will say, like, lifestyle I was living, like, everyone was in shock, very much including myself.
Yeah.
So that was just, like, kind of uncalled for, and I was like, "Ugh."
That's hard. Yeah. I mean, even myself, I've had some struggles too where I opened up and, it didn't get received. And then that just like emphasizes shame all the more. And I feel like it cuts
Yeah.
deeper into the wound that you are already trying to repair and get back on like a righteous track. But how did God start to like repair this situation? How did he reveal like his grand plan even through you knew that you were outside of maybe what you should have done, but you were starting to sense and feel all the more that you were actually still inside of his plan and love for you.
Oh, what a beautiful question. I think at first, like I mean, I was depressed basically for
Mhm.
my whole entire pregnancy. I dealt with prenatal depression. I have a whole episode on it, but um
That's
I
like
mean
the
most
first one. Sorry to interrupt. That's like the first one I listened to because honestly, my response to finding out I was pregnant too, even though I'm married and like we have a house and like everything's fine, I
yeah.
just didn't expect to be here now. And that's one of the first episodes I listened to that really helped me. So thank you for
Oh,
sharing your journey.
good.
Yeah.
Good. Um but yeah, like I mean most mornings I didn't have the energy or the desire
Mhm.
to even like get up and brush my teeth.
Yeah.
Like but what I really learned about God's grace through all of that is that I think so often we pray, one, that like the situation would just like be removed and would like
Mhm.
resolve. And that's definitely what I was praying before that positive pregnancy test. When you're freaking out, am I pregnant? Am I not? And I was like, oh my gosh, like please, like, sobbing my eyes out in prayer, like, please don't make this a reality kind of
Yeah.
thing. But I mean, then you're pregnant and what are you gonna do? So then my prayer really just came to be of like, Lord, just help me get through today. I just
Yeah.
need help today. And what I really learned about his grace is like, one, his grace truly is sufficient for us.
Mhm.
And secondly, though, he may not give you the grace to just overcome this huge like mountain at once.
Mhm.
It really may just be like I'm going to give you enough grace to get out of bed today. And then I need
Mhm.
you to trust me that I'm going to give you enough grace to get through your workday.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have to trust me that I'm going to give you enough grace and stamina to eat dinner tonight and like be able to fall asleep. I mean, that's another
Mhm.
thing when you're, in despair. Sleep isn't great. Um and that was just like I just had to cling to the Lord at every single chance
Mhm.
because truly like there was no way I could have survived that without him sustaining
Yeah.
me every step of the way. But even then like that's cool to like think about now, but when you're in it, it is very hard. Like
Yeah.
it's a
It
very
feels
very
like
hard.
manna from heaven. That's
Yeah.
I've been there a time or two, but I think what you just said really reminded me of a verse that I want to pull up if I can find it because it's so applicable. But it is Matthew. I know it's in Matthew as I search. Matthew 6:34. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. It's kind of like God knew that we would be forward thinking people who panic and are freaking out about the future. And He's like, just focus on today. Like, just
Yeah.
focus on today. So I love
Yeah.
that you shared that. And something that you shared on your podcast that I thought was so beautiful because I have also been sort of leaning into the story of Mary. As you said, you really connected to Jesus's mother during this time. And I would just love to hear how you connected to Mary and sort of what that meant for you during this time.
Yeah. So obviously one of the big misconceptions, Catholics like worship Mary, which we don't,
Yep.
blah, blah, blah. People who, whatever, I'm not going to go down there. I could freaking, I can go off.
You're like, that's a whole
Um,
podcast episode in
yeah,
itself.
that's a whole encyclopedia.
Yeah.
Um, But essentially, I was just raised in this like Mary has no point. Like she just
Mm-hmm.
kind of like was Jesus's mom, no big deal thing. And then I became Catholic, and it was like, whoa, no, Mary like actually is really respected, and like she raised Jesus here on earth. Like,
Yeah. She
you
went
know,
through a lot. Like it's crazy
yeah,
that people think that. Even in the non-denom like denomination myself, like we still know that Mary went through a hardship that none of us can really put
yeah,
ourselves in that position, you know. So,
yeah. But I like never really had like a relationship with Mary. So you
mhm.
may hear Catholics like asking the saints to pray for us. Like,
Mhm.
you're struggling with something because we don't believe that the body of Christ is separated by death, but like they're in heaven and they can pray for us, similar to like you
Mhm.
praying for me. Um, and so I would like, I never really like asked her to pray for me. I was just kind of like, I mean, she's there. Other Catholics like are really close with her, but like, not
Mhm.
really for me. And then all of a sudden I found myself in this unexpected pregnancy, and I just found a lot of like comfort
Mhm.
knowing that Jesus's mom, like she was in an unexpected pregnancy. Like,
Yeah.
you think she was ready for this? Like, I thought I had it bad, and here she was gonna be stoned.
Yes.
Like, talk about freaking faith.
Yeah.
And so I think just having like that example as well, and Jesus allowing me to get closer to his mother through my struggle
Mhm.
was just like a really great gift from him. Because
Yeah.
up to that point, like I didn't really have a relationship with him. And he was like, hey, I want you to know my mom better. So here
Mhm.
you go.
That's amazing. So Mary was kind of like a muse for you, and you saw parallels in her story because she was very young. Like she actually was a teen mom, pregnant unexpectedly, same thing, out of wedlock, but it was God's plan. How did you start to like accept where you were at, move past like I don't even like calling it a mistake because you knew like
I
right away.
know.
You know, it's like it feels harsh to phrase it that way, but for
I
lack of
know.
better terms, I'm just going to say mistake right now. But how did you accept like I made this mistake, I'm pregnant and I want to move forward and like focus on this life in me and whatever God is going to bring about from this? How did you start like forward thinking and get out of that place of despair?
I mean, truthfully, Addie, like it never.
Mm,
Like I felt that way until the moment that she was placed on my chest.
mm,
Like I really, really, really struggled until she was physically here. And
mm-hmm.
I think that was also just another huge grace from God, that I
Yeah.
like, a huge grace that I never experienced postpartum depression or anything like that, because I was depressed for the 40 weeks leading up to it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I really didn't, I think, start to believe truly in like, this is what God's plan is for me. I think I was still kind of like, I messed up, and like, I'm going to have, he's going to have to give me plan B because I messed up with plan A, like this
Yeah.
wasn't supposed to be for me. But then once she was on my chest, I was like, oh no, this is it. This is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm supposed to be. Um, and it just like everybody is different too, like even with my second, I didn't even have that like initial bond with him. It took like until we were out of the hospital for me to be like, okay, like you're mine. But I just
Wow.
like God just truly, I just think he was like, this girl cannot handle anything else. I've gotta give her a lot of grace here.
That's like, I saw a reel that said, Lord, if I'm on your strongest warriors list for 2025, can you please take me off? I feel that. I feel that in my soul. But did you feel like you said that you felt like you didn't really want to be a mom, that wasn't a part of your plan for yourself, but did you start to see how that was a part of God's plan for you and like accept that as it
Mm.
became your reality?
You are so great at these questions, Addie.
Oh, thanks.
Um, I think that I started to trust that it was God's plan when I mean, when you're pregnant, that is the reality that like you're already a mom and the baby is there, but it hits us differently as human beings when the life is outside of the womb.
Yeah.
Um, and so I feel like I really started trusting that this is God's plan once she was in my arms and like
Mhm.
this was the reality. Um, Gosh dang. Your question was so good. It made me think of like I had something else. And I guess this is just postpartum brain at its finest that I can't think. Can you please ask your question again?
Yeah, if I can remember it. See, we're struggling with postpartum brain and newly pregnant
Pregnancy
first
brain is
trimester brain.
also very difficult.
It's very real.
Yeah.
And
Our
also,
brain just poof gone.
it's like 6 p.m. around my time, which is when the evening sickness kicks in. So I'm like, will
Oh,
I throw up
Addie,
on this
I'm so
episode? We'll see.
sorry.
So, anyways, I think I
Oh,
asked how, even if you didn't picture being a mom in your plan, how did maybe like becoming a mom start to have you accept like this is a part of God's plan for me?
oh yeah. No. There you go. See, you're more with it than you give yourself credit for. Um, I think then I felt I just had I don't like literally the only way this is like so lame and I just feel like the whole thing is just like God's grace. Like everything I say is like God's
Mhm.
grace. Because one, I did nothing to deserve it. That is God's
Yeah.
grace. And secondly, like I had no control over it. It
Mhm.
was just like, here you go, you're gonna love being a mom. And yeah, to your point, I did not want to be a mom. Like
Mhm.
I wanted to be this career woman. I was living at home, working on relocating to London for my job. I had a
Wow.
really, really great job. Never thought that I would not like give I just really like I did not want to be a mom.
You couldn't picture it for yourself.
Yeah. And
And I can relate.
not that like if I knew like, okay, if I get married one day, I probably will be a mom. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't like, oh, kids are disgusting and I don't want to be a mom. But I think some women are God like places a little desire in their heart from day one that they always want to be a
Yes.
mom.
Yep.
Never me. Like I never wanted to play. If we were playing house, I was the cool big sister with the corporate job. Although of course it wasn't the corporate job. I was like
You were at the
working at
tool
the
bench.
yeah, I was bossing everybody around because I was the big sister, but no
Yeah.
way in heck was I gonna be the mom. Or
Yeah.
like I don't really remember necessarily like playing with baby dolls. It was just kind of
Mhm.
like I played with Barbies because Barbies had, she went on dates with Ken and she
They
got
were
to drive in a little
doctors
convertible.
and
Yes.
astronauts.
Literally.
Oh.
Um and then when she was here and I just started to experience like the joy
Mhm.
of living my vocation as a mom,
Mhm.
I think was when like things started to shift for me. And it was just little by little, like I just realized, I think just how much fun motherhood is. And no one tells you how fun it is.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, it's so hard. And
Yes,
like,
and they tell you the horror stories of like giving birth and how they
yes.
almost died and all these things, and you're like, great.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, yes, motherhood is so hard. And it is a gift as well because it is
Yeah.
so sanctifying
Yeah.
because it's so freaking hard, but it's so fun.
Yeah.
I genuinely have so much more fun, like, every single day of my life than I ever knew was possible.
That's amazing. That's really cool. I feel
And
like, oh, sorry. Keep
no,
going. Keep going if you got more.
oh, no, I don't think I have more.
I was just gonna say, like in Christian circles, I feel like you always hear like, "Oh, His grace is enough." Like His grace is enough. His grace is enough. But your story really is like His grace is enough. And so I just want to hear your kind of take on this with your story. maybe somebody's going through something way different than an unexpected pregnancy. Maybe it's an unexpected loss. Maybe it's
Yeah.
an unexpected medical condition that's going to change the course of their life. Like whatever it is, what advice do you think you could give someone who is scared and experiencing something that they just didn't plan? Like with
Yeah.
everything you've experienced with God, what advice could you give that person that feels like this is not part of the plan? How do I move forward?
Yeah. No, this is a good question. And I feel like this is very hard advice to give. So
Mm,
really the only thing that I can like offer this person is to like just give it to the Lord.
yeah.
Like to sit there, and if tears are falling down your face and if you want to yell at him, like yell at him, because he wants your bad just as much as he wants your good. And
I
he
always say God
wants,
can take it. God can take it.
yeah. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, many days in pregnancy, like trying to just cling on to the Lord, like a lot of days it was just me sitting on the floor of my room, sobbing my eyes out to God in
Mhm.
prayer. And I was like, oh, prayed today. Did I actually, or was it just me like crying my eyes out at the feet of the Father? You
Yeah.
know, like it was more realistically, it was that. But I think little by little, like he he will cover you in. He will hold you in. He will cover you with his arms,
Mm.
and like he's got this. And I know that that is impossible to see in the moment. And I also feel like a lot of it is that we are mad at him for changing our plans even though we have no control in this world, and like who are we
Mhm.
to who are we to have plans, right? Like
Yeah.
but we just have such a hard time like wrestling with that lack of control, that I feel like a lot of times it's not even the fact of like, oh, I'm pregnant, or oh, I lost my job.
Mhm.
It's really like, this isn't what I wanted for myself. And although we may trust him and we know that like up here,
Mhm.
it hits a lot differently when you're in it.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that is just like, you just come to the feet of the Father and give him whatever you have. Like
Yeah.
whatever you have. If that's 2 seconds, if that's 2 hours, if that's, I don't know, just like,
2 tears.
yeah. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
yeah. But he wants it and he can take it, to your point.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. And we just kind of talked about this in one episode, how a lot of times we pray to God and we're like, Lord, bless my finances and bless my health and but the second he taps into something that maybe we don't want to let go control of, we're like, God, what are you doing? This wasn't part of the plan. Like, as soon as he starts to change your career or your housing situation or whatever that looks like, sometimes we can look at God and be like, don't you want me to be comfortable? But I think a lot of
Yeah.
times as Christians, we forget that comfortable isn't necessarily part of the plan. And we can almost guarantee that there will be many uncomfortable moments, but that doesn't mean God doesn't love us. So that
Yeah.
kind of leads me to my final question for you. And that's, how did God's grace and love meet you more than like shame or fear? Because I'm picturing Layla, fresh news, or even maybe you're like have a big bump and you're walking into church. Like, how did you get past shame and fear to allow yourself to experience God's love?
Oh my gosh. Another really beautiful question, Addie.
Thanks.
Um,
Don't make me cry because I like have like pregnancy hormones right now and everything makes me cry. I wrote a letter to my neighbor the other day and gave her like some dinner and literally cried as I wrote it. Why? I don't know.
I really hate to break it to you, but it's gonna get worse.
Yeah, I know.
I
I know.
back like even my husband like will like get teary-eyed in commercials. Like being a
Yes.
parent just it
Wrecks
changes
you.
things. It
And I
really
never
does.
cried previously, so this is
Mhm.
like a whole new experience for me. Oh, anyways, do you remember the question? Because I don't.
I do. It was about God's love being like meeting you
Yes.
better
Yeah.
than like fear and shame.
Yeah.
I just think that when you're faced with a situation like this, not just pregnancy, but also like, losing your job or losing a baby or whatever, like you do have two paths. Like you
Mm.
either have to run to him or to run away from him. And I knew, like, I truly knew that I was not strong enough to do it alone. Like
Yeah.
the only way that I had to get through this was to cling to him. So cling to him I did. And that's how he gave me grace just to get through each and every day. It was the
Yeah.
only way that I got through it. Um, and I think like kind of also, I mean, honestly, like some of it is faking it until you make it. Like
Yeah.
truly. Like going to mass when I was huge and not like we got married when I was 7 months pregnant. But I mean, like, even then, like, I was huge and, like, I don't know, just, like, all of that guilt and, like, all that stuff. Like, I don't like my wedding photos and, like, I don't
Yeah.
really show people my wedding photos because I have this huge bump and it just, like, but I don't even know why I shared that. I'm just having fun with you. I feel like we're sitting on a
I
couch
mean,
and I'm not even doing,
yeah,
like, a real podcast. Not
this
that this
though
is
is
very official,
real.
but,
It's very real because I'm putting myself in your shoes and I couldn't imagine wedding dress shopping with a bump and allowing myself to feel like a beautiful bride, wrestling with the sin that I struggled with, but then also knowing that God's got this. I just can't imagine
yeah.
how you felt in that moment. And so I think you sharing that is just very real because chances are someone listening has also experienced that.
Yeah. But back to your first question,
Yeah.
or this one that you just asked. Like, I think just like you have to force yourself. Like you have to force yourself to go to church when
Mm,
it's super uncomfortable. And if your church is not welcoming you to you, like go to a different one
yeah.
or grab a girlfriend and who's really understanding of the situation and you two go to church together.
Hmm.
Go to small group, like get plugged in because that's really the only way that you're going to get through a situation like this. When you are in despair, like community makes such a big difference and the
Hmm.
Lord makes such a big difference. Having people to keep you accountable, which is why I think community plays a huge part. Having people that are going to bring you to Christ and like keep you accountable in these moments is sometimes really like the only way that you can do it. Because
Yeah.
when you don't have the energy to brush your teeth or get off the couch, how are you going to have the energy to like put on a cute outfit and go to small group? You're not. But if you have
Mhm.
someone being like, "Hey, I'm picking you up in 5 minutes and I'm taking you to small group," you're going to get off the couch.
Yeah. That's a good friend right there. That's a good
Yeah.
friend. I'm
Yeah.
really glad you had that. And like I said, I just feel like seeing your life now and hearing you share about it, you sound so healed and whole, but also like that season brought you so much closer to God. And that season also like defined your faith a little bit too, because you had to really
Yeah.
figure out how am I going to move forward in this? And I think you chose the really honorable path. And I'm just so happy for you and your family and seeing where you are now. I don't think you should be shameful at all of your wedding photos because I think it's a huge testimony to the Lord and his faithfulness.
Oh, I'm going to cry.
Don't start. I will cry back. But anyways,
But
I
you're
really,
so right. Like you are so right. Thank you
yeah.
for saying that.
You're welcome. And I really admire your bravery, especially in everything you share in your podcast. And I want to share soon to be mom to mom. It's helped me a lot. And I wasn't even in your position where I got pregnant outside marriage or anything like that, but I still could relate on my own level with the things going on in my life. And so
Yeah.
will you share your podcast one more time? Because I really want to put this resource in people's hands,
Hmm.
and I think it's information that really every woman should just know already, but unfortunately we don't. And so I love that you not only bring like transparency to mom life, just like you did the entirety of this podcast, but that you also bring information from doctors and professionals, and not just like your opinion. So please share your
Yeah.
podcast again so people can find it.
First, I want to tell you something
Yeah.
of like, I think for those of us that find ourselves in pregnancy specifically
Mhm.
and are really struggling with it, what's what I think makes it even harder for us is like when you have friends or when you know all the stats of like infertility and miscarriage, or like, you
Mm,
have a friend who's been trying to get pregnant for 6 years, who's crying to the Lord because she can't get pregnant. And like, here you are, and you're like, mm, I'm not even excited.
yeah.
Like, it just sucks. Like,
Mhm.
it just it sucks. The whole thing is just so tricky and like we'll never know. We'll just never know God's plan.
Yeah.
And that makes it really hard being on this side of heaven.
Mhm. That's real.
But My podcast. Yes. So as this podcast is wrapping up, you're probably grabbing your phone and typing in another episode of Addie's to listen to or some Taylor Swift to jam out to. So you might as well just grab your phone, type in Learning to Mom in the search bar. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, I'm there too. And I will hold your hand alongside of you as you walk through motherhood. And to Addie's point, yes, it's experts. So I know I kind of rambled quite a bit. This was my first episode recording since, I don't know, the summer. Like I
Wow.
just because, yeah, so my brain was not with it. I apologize, everyone, if you held on. Thank you. But it's like I just asked the questions. So it's a good time.
It's a great time. And she's being very modest because she brings a lot to the table, even in your own personal experience episodes where you're not like interviewing maybe like a doctor or something, but you're just sharing even your episode, like I said, with prenatal depression and things like that. Like they're just so helpful. So go listen, whether you're a soon to be mom, want to be mom, or current mom, there is value there. Or even if you're just a woman or if you're a man, go listen to it because chances are you might have a lady in your life one day. I mean, just go listen to it. And if they want to follow you on Instagram, it's also Learning to Mom, right?
Yeah, it's learningtomom.podcast. Allow me to be your official mom friend, especially if you don't have any mom friends yet.
Yeah. Well, Laila, I'm so happy that we're officially mom friends for real.
This was so great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you guys next time on Praising Me with Addie.